Welcome everyone for joining us for this evening's conversation. My name is Namulin Bayer-Sehan. I am the museum's education director. We have a live audience here today, and if you have your cell phones not on silent, please put them on silent because we are recording tonight's program. And we also have a Zoom audience joining us from their homes, so welcome. Thank you for being here with us as well. The Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum rests on the ancestral homelands of the Wappinger and Munsee Lenape peoples. So we honor them, and we are inhabiting a place called Ridgefield, Connecticut today. The Aldrich Museum is a non-collecting institution, so if you don't know what that is, that means we have new exhibitions all the time on view and no collection. I'm really pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. I have artist Elizabeth Englander here with us tonight, and I have my colleague Eduardo Alfonso, our associate curator. We will be holding a Q&A after the talk from both the live audience and our audience on Zoom. So if you're joining at home, please use the Q&A function in the screen in front of you, and we'll address those questions at the end of the program. So if everyone's comfortable and ready, I'm going to hand it over to Eduardo, and thank you all again for being here this evening.
Great. Thank you so much, Namulin. So it's my pleasure to give Elizabeth a more thorough introduction. Elizabeth is a sculptor. She was born in 1988 in Boston and now lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. She received her BFA from RISD in 2011 and her MFA from Hunter College in 2019. In May 2022, she presented Eminem Buddhism at Theta Gallery in New York. Elizabeth continued to unfold that research in her solo presentation at the Lista Art Fair in Basel in 2023, also with Theta Gallery, which was accompanied by a beautiful essay and book titled Wisdom Kings. Later in 2023, she presented Volume 2 of Eminem Buddhism at House of Gaga in Guadalajara, Mexico. In addition to this series of exhibitions, she has presented solo shows at Smart Objects in Los Angeles and From the Desk of Lucy Bull, also in Los Angeles. She's been included in many group exhibitions, among them at White Columns, New York, Lomex, New York, Wet Pipeline, Detroit, Theta, New York, and Night Gallery, Los Angeles. And with that introduction of Elizabeth, if we could hit the next slide, I will begin with a quick overview of the exhibition for those guests on Zoom. The exhibition consists of 3 rooms that, across the 3 rooms, contain sculptures that refer to a series of iconographic traditions. The first room, the South Gallery here in the museum, contains 16 yogini figures, female figures seated in meditation poses. The yogini series, I think, is currently at 35 yoginis, about, more or less, we'll say. And it's a series that Elizabeth began in 2022. Next slide. This is, again, a view of the South Gallery. Next slide. Next slide. Next again. In addition to the yoginis, there is a passage containing several small works. These figures refer to icons from the traditions of Jainism and Hinduism, among them the Jinnas, standing to the left in this image, Bodhidharma in the center, and Bahubali, who we'll talk about more in the talk. The exhibition really progresses across these 3 rooms to show the variety of subject matters that Elizabeth has worked with quite significantly. We also wanted to provide the audience with places to sit and meditate with the sculptures, which I think has been working to quite great effect. Next slide. And then the exhibition culminates with, or the exhibition brings you to a room with released spirits, icons that depict the disembodied form of a being once they've entered enlightenment. Next slide. Next slide. And so with that, I'm going to start. We've given an overview, and I think the first question in this conversation is quite straightforward. What was it, the subject of the yogini? It's obviously a big part of this exhibition. It's a project that now, since 2022, so 2 years, you've been working on. But it comes after a very prolific career in sculpture. And so I was curious as to what brought you to the yogini figure and how did that enter your practice?
Sure. Thanks, Eduardo. Thanks, Nomulan. I think one thing to say about the yoginis is that there are iconographies drawn from different types of figures, different goddesses, and then also like real historical figures. And so the first of those figures that I got really interested in was Caracal Amayar. I don't know how to pronounce that properly, but I'll do my best. Yeah, could we get the next slide? So this is a sculpture of her that's in the collection of the Met. It's quite small. It's like about this big. And I was interested in this depiction because it's a rare image of a female ascetic in the Indian tradition, but also like in world traditions. And one of the things about Caracal Amayar is that it's like she was married and had a sort of a conventional life of a householder, and she ended up, it's a complicated story, but she ended up renouncing all of that and worshiping Shiva. And so we actually have her poetry. She lived in the 6th century, and her poetry is like sung as hymns in Tamil Nadu in South India to this day. And so, yeah, part of her transformation was this physical transformation where she becomes a ghoul that worships Shiva in the graveyard. This is how she describes herself. So she describes withered breasts and growing fangs. And I was just so struck by this like really rare type of woman who did exist and the way that she's represented in sculpture. So a lot of the first sculptures in this series were drawn from representations of her, and then I sort of expanded my purview. I realized I needed to learn a lot about religious history and also art history, and so in the process of that, I found more things I wanted to work from. So maybe we could go to the next slide. This is another sculpture in the gallery. This is the 7th yogini that I made, and if you go to the next slide, this is the sculpture that I was working from. It's in the Detroit Institute of Arts. And this one is big, like larger than life. And it comes from a group of sculptures that have been scattered into museum collections around the world, but especially in the West. And we don't know actually like what temple they came from. But they represent the yoginis, who are these ferocious goddesses. And so yogini temples will have like up to 88 goddesses ringed in a circle. And so this sculpture would have come out of one of those sculptural ensembles. And so, yeah, it's not a historical person, but she shares some iconographic features with Caracal Amayar, including like the fangs and these sort of like weapons. And it's a dimension of Hindu spirituality that sort of is like, things that tend to have a negative valence are seen for their like liberatory potential, I guess is the way I would describe it. Cool. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think also, and kind of correct me if I'm over speaking, but I think that, you know, a thread that runs through Caracal and the yoginis, I think that we also spoke about in relation to more contemporary art, was the portrayal of a woman not only as a caregiver, but also someone capable of acting quite decisively and aggressively to defeat evil in the case of the yoginis, but to, you know, to counter that in the world, which is not right. And it's a powerful aspect of the original yogini sculptures. I had the pleasure of seeing one in Washington, D.C. not so long ago, and they really embody this in terms of, you know, these stone sculptures both hold tools of the house, but they also hold weapons. And I think that duality is also really present in Caracal's story of being both the devoted wife for a huge portion of her life, but just as quickly becoming the kind of devoted ghoul to a different ends, let's say.
Yeah.
Then I think the kind of next thing to discuss, which is quite consequential, is that the references that we just saw were bronze and stone in this case. And you've, of course, selected a very different materiality from these source objects that combines, it's all wood, the material is wood for every yogini, but where that wood is coming from is quite different. So I was hoping you could talk about the kind of significance of both the found pieces and how you situate those to become bodies. I think we have some slides that will show a bit of that process.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I would just say that like the earliest icons were probably definitely made of wood, and certainly in the Buddhist tradition, they were said to be made of sandalwood. But obviously wood objects don't survive in the way that stone and metal ones do.
Next slide, yeah.
I was interested in working with wood as a biological material that also has that history of like being imbued with spirit. And then the nutcrackers came about as I was sort of searching around for wood objects. I actually found one like on the street that was kind of messed up. It was like wintertime. It looked like it had been like in a snowplow. And so that was the first one I worked from, and then it just got me thinking about them as objects. I grew up with a collection of nutcrackers that came out every Christmas, and so I started gathering more and taking them apart. I mean, they're kind of like, if you ever owned them or been around them, they kind of want to fall apart anyway. The arms are always falling off. So they're quite easy to take apart, and there was definitely something cathartic about just like cutting. I asked permission, but I cut up my whole family's collection, and then I bought many other collections that were very similar. And you know, some days in the studio, I was just like dismembering these little white men all day. And so, yeah, you can kind of see this like piles of pieces that I had. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Oh yeah, and then this is the first one that I found. And then that's the family collection that I pulled out to ask for permission.
Yeah, and I think of course, nutcrackers themselves are figures. They come with arms, legs, and a face, but that doesn't necessarily translate to their arms, legs, and faces becoming the corresponding parts of the yoginis.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was really seeking these like grotesque transformations. So if you look in the show upstairs, it's often like body parts are becoming different body parts, or they're being cut in half. Like a lot of breasts I made out of like cutting a torso in half and then opening it up. Like, so yeah, a lot of like just trying to repurpose it, like each time trying to find a new way.
Yeah. I was also, I think maybe we can go to the next slide. Actually, sorry, let's return to that previous slide for a second, because I think that one thing that, you know, in your texts about Eminem Buddhism Volume 1 and 2, these are kind of, to call them a press release is a bit of a disservice because they're actually quite beautiful autobiographical pieces of writing that you made, I guess, in collaboration with the galleries that you work with. But in them, I think it's interesting that you write about nutcrackers as kind of mass-produced, as something that is really kind of running through a material economy in a way that is, you know, kind of instantly becomes very emotionally invested. These are family heirlooms, but also just as quickly, as you said, they're not crafted very well. They tend to chip and fall apart, and they also quickly become junk. And I think that in the press release for the first Eminem Buddhism, you talk about releasing these objects from their karma of this cycle. I was wondering, yeah.
I mean, that's aspirational, you know? But yeah, I think, like you said, I'm interested in them as something that straddles like a folk art object and a mass-produced object, and is sort of used to like generate a sense of like heritage or something like that. And and then at the same time, there's what I feel is this impulse to kind of like take that apart, and to maybe like open up space for other possibilities, I guess.
Yeah. I think now we can go to the next slide. Great. And then this is a piece I particularly love where it's situated, and as we'll hear in the story, it has a lot to do with the kind of landscape that it overlooks, but kind of consistent throughout the figures. They're in different poses, their histories of these icons, while overlapping, are also unique in many ways. But a thread that I found throughout, and a kind of, I think, very significant part of the show, is that they're all figures in meditation, whether that be standing meditation or seated meditation. I'm fascinated by this aspect in part because a tradition of Western sculpture, as inherited from kind of classical art, typically depicts the figure, oftentimes male, in kind of acrobatic feats of dynamic motion. And these, of course, are figures that are not moving. Could you talk about that decision and maybe share that through the story of Bahubali? Maybe a lot to dovetail together.
So Bahubali is a Jain legendary figure. He was about to kill his brother in a war of succession, and he stopped himself. And he stood. Jain figures are only depicted in either seating or standing meditation. And so he stood for a year, standing meditation, and like trees, like plants grew up around him and birds lived on him. So that's what you see, this piece is in the Met, it's like really tiny. He's depicted, with these like plants growing up around him. And it's really, it's not my, something I realized as I was working from this was just, it's the perfect subject for figurative sculpture, like a figure that is actually supposed to be still. And it's also, like any seated Buddha sculpture or standing figure, is also like an instruction manual for how to meditate. At least part of it really is the posture. And so, I don't know.
Yeah, I think at some point you spoke about the kind of radical stillness of them, which I thought was just like, it was such a...
Yeah. Well, Bahubali becomes a statue, right?
Yeah.
And that's a purposeful act, and it's also non-action. Yeah.
You can go to the next slide. I maybe wanted to take an aside quickly before we embark on this. So maybe, I know that anyone that knows you knows that you're a kind of prolific attendee of the Met and you do a lot of research there. Could you maybe share a bit about how you approach, like how do you...
I mean, I think I've realized that I'm trying to visit every temple of the muses or something. I really love museums, but I was a guard at the Met for 6 months, which isn't very long, but it was long enough to really make it feel like home, and I use it as like a resource in that way. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's cool. Great, so Yogini number 26 is on the slide so that we can maybe talk a bit about the title of the exhibition and a bit about the history of some of these objects. So maybe to give Eminem Buddhism, the multi-platinum recording artist Eminem is not directly depicted in the exhibition. He comes in through a very specific family story that maybe you could share, and then we'll kind of unpack some of that a bit more.
So Eminem Buddhism was my little brother's idea when he was like in 4th grade, I think. He wrote these stories, typed them on the computer about Eminem and Buddha going on adventures together. And he claimed Eminem Buddhism was a religion he invented, but I don't know exactly what the doctrines were, but what's in the stories is the Buddha, like, he sees Eminem, as we say now. He's like, actually, in the stories, my brother has told the Buddha that Eminem's a good guy. But yeah, it's like, I think my brother, like a lot of young men, young boys at the time. He identified with something about Eminem's rage. And then some part of him also knew enough about Buddhism to recognize that this was kind of like an opposite figure. And so with the imagination of a child, he just has them meet and reconciles this kind of seemingly irreconcilable, these figures, yeah. So I was kind of inspired by like the logic of that. I sort of realized that I was doing something like that with this sculpture. And so I borrowed the title from him.
Yeah, I think I was really struck. I think it took me quite a while. I've seen the iterations of this exhibition. I think the title to me has really, it's evolved over time. It's like led me down different paths of reading the sculpture, which I think is very beautiful. But one of the things at its core to me was this kind of, this refocusing on the mind of a child, or the kind of creative aspects of childhood where the categorizations between, a kind of, the categorizations between a sinner and a not sinner in like a parlance of Western Christianity, or someone that's religious and not, the idea that one could convert is both fun and true in the mind of a child. And I found that kind of hearkening back towards a flexible view on where things belong to be a really significant aspect of the exhibition.
That's interesting. In terms of how like even the elements get used in the sculptures.
Similarly, like why can Pinocchio's head not be like resituated within a new context? Because I also know that, that in this process, in the process of making the yoginis within this show, you've also added new discourses into it. Your life around the yoginis has changed, and you've also kind of embarked on a meditation practice in a very significant way, very profound and significant way. And amongst those things that came into the exhibition through your practice of Zen Buddhism, I think one of the things that we've resonated talking about is this idea of the beginner's mind, which I see kind of Eminem, the title, and what that does to you relating to this aspect of the beginner's mind. So maybe I think a lot of our audience won't know what this concept of the beginner's mind is, and you're probably more apt to kind of give a thumbnail sketch of it.
There's a famous book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is like the first thing they tell you to read in the tradition of Zen that I've started practicing in. It's written by this teacher who came from Japan named Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. He came to San Francisco and he taught a lot of hippies in the 60s. And I think the line, I might get this wrong, but I think what he says is, like, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, and in the expert's mind, there are few. So, and I feel like that's actually an idea that has, like, permeated our culture, and it's probably, like, in an Apple ad.
Possible.
In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, and in the expert's mind, there are few. I mean, Zen really encourages an attitude of not knowing, or like a recognition of not knowing. And I think that's like almost like a resource that any creative person can draw on, is just
Great.
Either to recognize what you don't know, or to just like turn your head and see all these other things that you don't. There's obviously so much that's outside of our view. So I think that attitude has sort of brought me along through this body of work.
Yeah, and I found it kind of maybe in my reading of the sculptures really a kind of impactful way to look at the materiality and the way in which, why can't the Buddha's head be Pinocchio, or why, I think there's also a profound admiration of humor, I think, kind of nested within that is really beautifully kind of displayed by these sculptures as well. I quite enjoy it when I'm in the galleries and I hear someone kind of like chuckle because they've discovered some new anatomical ad lib that you've inserted within one of the pieces. It's like a very nice feeling to have in a museum. I wanted to quickly see where we are on time. Okay, great. I think we can maybe have one more. We'll have one more question from us, but we'll go slightly off our script maybe,
Okay.
and
All
we can do
right.
the next slide. I think that there are a couple of pieces that are predominantly kind of monochromatic and made out of wood and approach the figure in a different way. I'm thinking specifically of number 34, which is on this slide, and if we can do the next slide. Number 35, these two approach the figure in a very different way, and I know they were quite recent, so maybe you have some kind of recollection of a shift that happened in the formation of the yoginis around these two specific works.
Sure, yeah. So I guess I finally worked my way west, east?
East.
I have a left, right, west, east
yeah.
problem, but I finally got around to reading about Zen art history.
Well, moving west from here, moving east from India, the world is a globe.
Yeah, that's why I have the problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was looking a lot at Zen painting, which feels more like drawing, just kind of calligraphic drawing tradition. That when you look at the canon, the way that I've found it presented, some of the most known Zen artists were actually some of the most known Zen teachers. It's all these people that I'd been hearing these little stories about at the temple are the biggest painters in the tradition, which was amazing to discover.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole tradition of simplification that happens of drawing, especially Bodhidharma, the initial teacher of the sort of the big teacher of Zen.
Yeah.
In increasingly simplified ways. So it starts with there's actually a tradition of trying to do it in one stroke. So drawing the figure, and then eventually they start drawing him from behind. So you lose the facial features, and then there are some that are even, just like the outline of what this is, but even more simplified representations. There are some where I almost can't even see the figure. Yeah. And so, I think I was interested in how do you translate that into sculpture is always a kind of impossible thing, like an empty sculpture.
Yeah.
But that's what drove these ones. Yeah.
Quite beautiful.
And the wood, I guess, I think it's funny, I like color and pattern and, the aesthetics of Zen as I learned them, as a whatever, layperson in art culture never appealed to me, but kind of approaching this simplicity with a little bit more appreciation and trying to figure out what that's about for me.
I think now we can move to taking questions from both our Zoom audience and our in-person audience. I will look to my colleagues on the left to voice any questions from Zoom, but otherwise, maybe we'll take one question from Zoom first, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Elizabeth, with the work Bahubali 2022, even though it is wood, the gold paint gives it a metallic look. Going back to your discussion of materials, what was your thought process behind making the work mimic metal?
So thanks for the question. I don't treat the surfaces of the sculptures at all. I don't paint. I didn't apply any of the paint that's in that room, and I don't sand them. So I actually found a brass headboard, brass painted wood headboard.
You can just cycle through them.
On Craigslist in Baltimore. And I made this piece also. I made a lot of pieces out of this one headboard. But it's many of the sculptures in the tradition are made of metals. There's a lot of beautiful, shiny gold icons. And so it's kind of a way of approaching that. But yeah, I like this. I feel like every time I try to work with metal, I want it to be like a soft version of metal. So I like that it's like a metallic paint. I've made sculptures out of like steel wool before.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a different version of this kind of like soft metal for me.
I think there's also, I know in your essay for Wisdom Kings, there's also kind of like a beautiful significance to worn wood. Many of these, you described a kind of entire tradition of wooden icons that because of the futility of that material they're not transported around the world and collected in quite the same ways. And I also see, the care and love, we oftentimes kind of euphemistic pre-loved things in our kind of culture of secondhand shopping, but there is a way in which like the pre-loved worn aspect of these also corresponds to the way in which wooden sculptures are used. Their wooden sculptures in India are fed, they're bathed.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, there's a temple in Jagannatha, I also don't know how to say that, in Puri. They replace the idol every couple decades because it's bathed every day, and so they make a replica and then they reconsecrate it. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. I always have an issue with like archivality around my work. People want to know, like, is it going to last forever? And I've always been like, nothing lasts forever. And now that I'm a Buddhist, I can just be like, impermanence. But yeah, I think it's important that they were beings, and now they're something like bones, and they still interact with the world like any other material. Like the stone's not going to last forever either. But they're not that different. It's just not that different from us, I think, actually. Yeah. So to me, it makes it more lifelike when it's also like has some vulnerability. It will live. They can last longer than we can, I think.
Yeah.
But, sure.
I'm looking to you all for in-person or Zoom. Yeah. Go ahead, Jordan, please.
I wonder if you could speak a bit more about your impulse to make smaller works and like the difference in scale between some series and the other.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of, it's interesting we showed the small Bahubali because there's a massive one that's like, I don't know, like 40 feet tall or something that is in South India that's very famous. And it seems like a lot of the small ones are probably like souvenirs from pilgrims who went there. So yeah, you kind of always find both, like the temple sculptures could be life-size or larger than life-size. And then for private devotion, there are the small ones, and those would also exist in temples too. But yeah, I mean, we needed to make things we could sell, since you asked. But also that's the tradition of, like, that's why the small things always existed, because so some things need to be more portable so that they can live in the home and have a different kind of role. And so, yeah, I think it's like, to me, it's really exciting to also have these things. The other thing about the small ones is they end up just, to me, they like resurrect the nutcrackers. A lot of them are built on the bases of the nutcrackers. They're about the scale of the nutcrackers, and they kind of stand like that. But they do it in a different way, and their bodies are different.
Almost like something people think they recognize, and then
yeah,
something new.
yeah.
I also think that there's spending time with a lot of the large ones and the small ones in the same space. There's also there's a beautiful material ecology, right? That nutcrackers themselves, like their torso is one scale, but their arm might be interpreted as a torso in a different scale. So as well, these scalar relationships help kind of define the way that materials are moving in and out of the studio. And I would imagine allow you to kind of use the whole nutcracker from nose to tail in a certain way.
Yeah, and also like the chairs. A lot of those little guys are made out of chairs, and it went from like being the seat that they're on to like being the body. So yeah, it was kind of in and out.
Yeah. We're just cycling through images of other works in the show as we're talking. Yeah, please.
In the presentation, all of the source material that you reference is very much removed from the context in which it was intended. It's a different building and a different purpose. I often think about how the objects of modern and contemporary art might fare in a different context.
Yeah.
Say out in the woods, if someone discovered it, would it have its power? Would it have its poetry? Would they even know what it was without its clues? Inversely, I'm curious if when you make your work, it's somehow helpful for you to imagine it outside of the context of the museum or gallery or collector's home.
That's interesting. What other context could it be in? In a temple, yeah, yeah. I mean, I do think of it that way, but then it does. Yeah, I mean, my favorite works of art are like the Matisse Chapel. You know, these things happen. Have you been there? It is a church. It's still, the nuns still use it. But yeah, it's a little, I haven't like quite gotten there yet. I mean, these works are not consecrated, you know, that's one thing. There's a whole process that they have to go through to really become icons in that way. So I think actually it is about, I actually think like, not these ones, but the small ones, if you saw it in the world, you would just think like collectible. You would think like it's a nutcracker, kind of, I think. But then it's encoded with something else. And I think that's just how it has to function. I don't think I answered your question, but yeah. Is it helpful for you to think of them in a different context?
I don't know about that, but I certainly find the gallery and the museum and the collector's home quite limiting for the real erratic possibilities of an object. And if I only imagined it being in that room, I would have a small imagination.
Yeah. But I think like us, they just have to be in that room. Like I never mess with the lighting because I just feel like here we all are. Like the lighting in most galleries, we turned the lights up from where they were. We did change the lights and it was a long process. But I haven't ever done like dramatic lighting because I feel like there's just like a distanciation that's created. And yeah, I mean, we all have to suffer in like the fluorescent lights and the works do too. And I have so little control over their lives. Like, I feel like I talk about them as like my children, but it's like I'm like a spider. Like, I don't know where they go, you know, after I give birth to them, hopefully. And a lot of them won't survive. So yeah, I mean, it's a little bit, you know, all the works, all the stuff that I look at is taken out of context, right? It's like these things existing in museums. And when I worked at the Met, there were things come up where like people want to worship these objects. And so we were given instructions about what to do if that happened. But yeah, even in those places, they're still doing something, you know, it did something to me. It brought me to practice. So I think they just have to live in the world like we do.
If I can,
but I would love to do a temple or a chapel.
If maybe I could I add something kind of based on my observation of bringing visitors to the show. You know, I think in cases of a lot of art, you can speak about it as having a contingent relationship to the environment, the space that it's in. I really see these as having a contingent relationship to the body that approaches them, in the sense that they kind of, their context feels complete when someone sits across from one and slowly, without recognizing that they're doing it, adapting and slowly moving into the pose, and slowly kind of like their back creeps up and their posture becomes better. And I think that to me that the embodiment that they perform reciprocally with the viewers has always been contextually more important than the room that they're in, so to speak. And I think that's why you and I were kind of thinking about the exhibition as like, how do we give people a place to sit with the yoginis so that they're activating that relationship of embodying the sculpture and seeing themselves through and in it. Yeah, we have another.
So we have another question from an
I feel like
attendee
it's a
joining
phone
us by
hotline.
Zoom. With the array of sizes in the exhibition, and you spoke about the sizes of the original sculptures, I wonder, how do you think about scale when making your work?
I love working at what I consider to be life scale, which is what to me, those yoginis are like life size, but they might not look like it to someone else. I don't know.
Cetics are small.
What?
Cetics are very small.
Cetics are small. Well, it's not the whole body. There might be more. I don't know. To me, I measure things off of my body when I'm working on them. I sit on a low stool because if I worked on them on a table, like everything would look wrong when it's on the floor. So I also have to be on the floor so that and they have to be on the floor so when I step back, it looks right. And then, yeah, it's a tricky, I guess I learned from drawing or something, but yeah, I will hold the stick up to my arm and then, okay, that's about right. So yeah, there's something there that's so, like once I had an assignment to do a self-portrait by touch in a drawing class, and I kind of feel like there's an aspect of that's happening when I make those pieces. And then the small things, for me, that's much more like, I mean, they're like Barbie dolls also. That's a kind of imagination world.
Yeah.
The thing I haven't done is go like larger than life, really. I've like creeped up to it, but I've been thinking lately about what that would mean. But yeah, I think it's a moving target scale.
Yeah, please.
So some of my favorite works that you have are the ones where you're using the negative space to create the figures. And to me, it feels like it must be a really different process that you go through because you're looking at the objects and how the space between them is going to create the bodies. Can you just talk about that process a little bit? Because I find myself the most kind of in awe of those particular pieces, like the really spirit ones that are like the smaller ones that create these gorgeous figures that are so simple but so powerful.
Thanks.
And the dismembering, it must be different because you're not using like this head is going to be the head. It's the space that's creating this magical presence. So can you just talk a little bit about those in particular?
Yeah, so the question was related to the released spirit works, which are built as negative versions of the figures. So their form is described as an outline, and how for Elizabeth is the process of making these figures that are defined as a negative void different from the figures that are defined as positive voids, right? So formed with limbs and such, yeah.
So those ones are like impossible to make. Like I have made as many as I can, but partly that's the limitations I've imposed. Like I have a handsaw, I can do straight cuts and that's it. So I have to find, like really it's like finding the head, figuring out how I'm gonna get an empty circle from these scraps I find has been quite hard. And then, yeah, I mean, I love it. It's like such a paradox. Also, they only work from like right frontally. Like if you move a little bit, it kind of breaks the sculpture, which is so funny because the other ones, like you have to move to see it. But yeah, I just lay the pieces out when I start them, and then it's like, fuck, how am I gonna connect these? And I've made as many as I could with this method. But yeah, I mean, how do you like become a released spirit? It's like impossible. So I feel like it makes sense that it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, please. No, please. We'll take both.
I was going to ask how you sort of, the process of assembling them, which seems very kind of delicate, and you're placing things back together in a new fashion, and whether you place them out and then draw. But you were mentioning the kind of like catharsis of sawing the head off and removing the kind of nutcracker. And I'm curious, like in the process of sort of like reassembling or kind of producing, if there's a kind of catharsis in that, or it feels sort of like more of
definitely, yeah.
Like, because they're so symmetrical and they have this real presence in that way.
Yeah.
Spiritual.
I mean, it's
So
like...
I'll just quickly repeat the question, sorry. The question for our audience on Zoom was, how do you assemble the sculptures? It's a very specific process, and they kind of come together. The question was describing how they come together like puzzles, and is there a kind of catharsis of when that structure gels and just sits and stands, right? That was the gist of the, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I realized the opposite of dismembering is remembering. So yeah, it's like giving them all their parts or as many as they need so that they feel like they're good. Also, when they get all their parts, they kind of click together and get stronger. That's very satisfying. The process of making the more three-dimensional ones is different. Like I can't lay it, I do lay out what I can on the floor, but then obviously like it's happening in 3 dimensions. So it's a lot of like holding things in space. And then there's another drawing exercise that I think I drew on a lot for this of like, we would use like a Conte crayon on its side, so you make like a really straight line and you connect between all the points. So basically like I would do like my knee to my elbow, and then I would do like my elbow to my shoulder, and you start to locate what are the coordinates. And so I think that's kind of how those are made, but happening in 3 dimensions. So a lot of times it's like figuring out what the right angle is, but then I have to like remove a piece, so I have to memorize an angle in 3 dimensions with my drill to get it right, and it's kind of like a drawing process that happens that way. So I don't know what it looks like. It is quite hard to make those pieces so that they feel right in space. But yeah, and it's very, I can't place something and step away. I'm right there with it the whole time. And that's where it feels like there's almost like a double that's being generated or something. I don't know if that answered you.
Great, and then we had another question from this side, yeah.
Something I enjoy walking through the space and interacting with the yoginis is that they each kind of have their own personality. And I think it comes through with kind of the selection of nutcrackers or the found objects. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about like your process about how you interact with that, or like do you think about their personality, or does their personality come through as you're selecting?
Yeah.
So the question for our audience on Zoom was that the yoginis seem to have very different personalities, and if Elizabeth is thinking about giving them different personalities in the process of making them. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of times, okay, like the lion one, I had that lion head, and it has a personality. That's like a being, like on its own. It came off of a Noah's Ark toy. So yeah, when they're starting to form, a lot of times, I would have like stools, and I start just like piling the stuff on the stool. Looking for color and things that are thematically connected or whatever, and then it's like, how many holes can I put in that piece? How am I going to get a knee? So a lot of things get swapped out. They get like new parts, and so yeah, that part of it is through the parts, and then the other piece of it is like, what is the iconography that I think I want to use with these parts? So like for the lion one, that's working from the iconography of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, who's depicted like in royal ease, sitting like this. And so there was something about like royal ease is the lion, and there's a connection there. But then the way that its personality, that's where it feels like it's like a being. It's like my baby. It's like there's something mysterious that happens when those things come together. And there is a point where there's like a new thing that's alive-ish to me in the studio, and that's when I know that we're like going in the right direction. So it doesn't always happen, but yeah.
Yeah, please.
Have you ever put pieces into some sort of public or other setting where people didn't know what it was? In other words, they didn't know that it was art, and if so, what kinds of reactions were there?
Trying to think.
So the question was if these pieces have ever been shown in a public setting, and if people had encountered them without knowing that they were art.
No, that would be cool. Yeah. No, not with these pieces.
I mean, I think that the question in a way also kind of, how many times did you interact with a nutcracker not knowing that it was art?
Yeah.
And I think there's an incredibly profound ability that you have. I mean, as you were talking about the lion that's on the screen behind us, it's a perfect example of the humor that I think I was talking about, that this kind of childlike humor, of course, like the lion is royal, king of the jungle. It's going to be in royal ease. There's like a fun, quick association. But yeah, I think that, it's a practice that really makes you re-engage with the material world around you. And I, for one, have started seeing the forms of quite commonplace things and then being like, this is a torso now, like this could be an arm. And there's I don't know what would happen if someone encountered them like in a field, as someone else mentions, but I think the idea is, or it's not the idea, there's many ideas, I don't want to define it as such, but one should be open to encountering anything and giving it the care that you would give to something that has been kind of erratically qualified as art.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Great. Okay. It looks like we maybe have we're at time. Is that what I'm getting? I think that was like a very nice question to end on as well. So thank you everyone who joined us on Zoom, and thank you to all of us in person. And yeah, I highly recommend that you visit the gallery in person to see this incredible exhibition. And thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Eduardo.